Okay, so, yeah. Let's go ahead and get this going. This is Hoosier Hardware. This is a bit of a new format for me. And the reason I'm doing this format is simply because it's easier tonight to do it this way, and I am curious to see how this format goes over. This is a very impromptu thing that I'm doing here, so I'm going to go ahead and pull this aside and find my... and let's see if we can... Hoosier Hardware. Yeah, let's see if we can get this live. That's what we want. So while that's loading, let me do a sound check here in a bit. I'm live talking about the Ryzen 1700X benchmark leak. Join me here. And I apologize for those of you, which will be most of you if you're watching this, which will be after the fact. However, that's just the nature of things. Okay, so sound works, which is really what I wanted to know. That's the big thing here. So here's the deal. Ryzen is sort of the big news of the year. So far this year in tech, and I wanted to talk briefly about the Ryzen 1700X performance leak that I have the Forbes article pulled up that I came across this morning. The leak itself actually may, in fact, I'll back up for a second here. The Forbes article is from 12 hours ago, so there are any number though of articles you can read. The benchmark, however, itself comes from xfastest.com. And one of the great things I love about these leaks is that you have all these leaks from some foreign websites. Like I believe this one's probably from China. And they are, it's almost like the biggest leaking point is these different Chinese storefronts or whether it wants to be blogs or news sites or whatever. It's interesting to me that the leaks are not coming from Europe or the United States or some of those other places that we're used to seeing some leaks from. And I don't really know if there's any sort of deeper meaning behind that. But normally you're used to seeing sort of the news sources come from places that you've heard from. There are a number of leakers that a lot of times we get really familiar with. The BLT leak was a good one, and I'm not talking about the bacon, lettuce, tomato leak there. Hey, the original Zilla, how's it going? I'm not talking about the food BLT. I'm talking about the BLT.com leak from earlier. So I've never heard of xfastest.com. It looks like a nice site, but the Forbes article shows us a graph, and I believe the writer of this actually added some of their own numbers into the graph, at least from what I was reading earlier, to give us a little bit more of a comparison point to the 1700X. And you'll notice that the 1700X is in red, as well as the AMD Ryzen 5 1600X, and the 1600X is a 6-core 12-thread part, whereas the 1700X is an 8-core 16-thread part, which matches up with, the 6900K, at least as far as the core count and thread count goes. It does not match up with the 5960X, which I believe, I'm on double check this Newegg style here, I believe the 5960X was a 6-core part. I lied. The 5960X is an 8-core part. So, clock for clock, well, not even clock for clock. That's not even a fair comparison. Because the 5960X is not new architecture. It's just not. That being said, and now that it's closed, I need it immediately again. So the 5960X, at least on Newegg, retails for just shy of $1,100 after tax. It's way over $1,100. And then, for comparison's sake, the 6900K. Maybe. The 6900K retails for $1,050. And like I said, 5960X being Haswell E is still a little bit older architecture. And just reading this comment. That comment's dead on. With what I read, anyways, was that the shop BLT leak was super dead on in the past, which is why we sort of believe it this time around. And it's always good to see when you get leakers. It's nice to see reputable leaks anyway, or leaks from reputable places that have had good history with actually hitting the nail on the head, so to speak. And that's one of the things that I think maybe is missing from this current one. And being benchmarks, though, and being so close to launch, I would guess it's probably about factual with X Fastest. But they don't have the same track record that the Shop BLT leak had, which is what was so exciting about the Shop BLT leak, was that we did have that pass with it. What's interesting about this leak, though, is that it's not just the 1800X that's going toe-to-toe with Intel. It's now the 1700X that is also going, toe-to-toe with the Intel side of things. And it's exciting for me, for a builder, because one of the things I'm looking into myself is looking for Ryzen parts and where I can fit that into my personal setup, because I currently run a 4790K, which is Haswell, and it's DDR3, it's the older platform. And in fact, when I upgraded, I had the option to go with Skylake. And the reason I didn't go to Skylake at the time was that I didn't want to upgrade my RAM. Skylake, to me, didn't offer anything huge as far as feature set that I was really going to use. I still use SATA drives. I don't use any NVMe, anything like that. So Haswell was perfect for me in that it allowed me to keep my 32 gigs of RAM that I already had. So there was really no reason for me to upgrade in anything beyond that. So now, though, if I want to go to DDR4, which, by the way, I kind of do want to go to DDR4. Obviously, with my next upgrade, I have to. So AMD is finally giving us a compelling reason to upgrade if we're already on an i7 platform, because I have an actual upgrade path that is cost effective for me. A 1700X currently, a 1700X at its current price is barely more expensive than an i7 Skylake, and it's competing with a 6900K, which is an over $1,000 part. So, and if you're Intel, and those of you that are in chat right now, you can sort of chime in on this a little bit, but if you're Intel, do you drop the 6900K down to $600 to at least the point where it's a little bit competitive with the performance? Because I talked to my brother about this a lot, and I was talking to him, and I was saying, the 1800X, the 1700X, and even to an extent the 1600X, the 1500, all those things, they offer really, really great multi-thread performance, but for a gamer, when most games are only using quad core or maybe a little bit better, but scaling typically across multiple threads past 4 is kind of poor in games. Most games are not looking to take advantage of 8 threads. So the 1700X, the 1800X, the 1600X, even to an extent, are those processors maybe geared more at content creators that are that are not so much gamers, but and thus probably not the mass market, and they are sort of targeted at streamers. I'll give them that all the way around. But if they don't offer the gaming performance of the i7, are they even really competing with the i7 directly? And that was what me and my brother were talking about, and we sort of we sort of came to the conclusion that as long as the performance was close to the i7s, even though the i7s will probably, unless Ryzen overclocks like an absolute boss, which I don't expect. But if they do, if Ryzen does overclock like a crazy boss, then maybe clock for clock it gets close to the i7s. But the i7s, if you're overclocking a 7700K and you're getting nearly, you're getting close to 5 gigahertz, it's gonna blow away Ryzen performance, I would think, in gaming, because it's only taking advantage of 4 threads, and on a quad core, even with hyper-threading, I realize there's 8 threads there, but it's going to utilize each core. So the 7700K should be, gaming-wise, a lot better. I would think, anyways. But if Ryzen presents such a value that you can't overlook it, then you get into the talk where, yeah, price for performance. Because when you start looking down at the quad-core 8 threads, the 1400X, for example, at $200, if it is, and some of you in chat are sort of echoing sort of my thoughts too, but if you're looking at the 1400X here, $200, that's sub i5 7600K pricing. That's right at the locked pricing of the i5s. And if it competes at least with the 7700K, it doesn't have to equal, and that's one of the things that I think people are, or at least some people, missing. Right? Yeah, and in fact, one person just pointed that out. Ryzen doesn't have to compete directly; it just has to be close. And with the pricing, Ryzen is gonna not just be close, but I fully expect, for example, 1400X, which is gonna be competing with the i5s price point wise, I fully expect the 1400X to demolish the i5s in most tasks. Maybe not in gaming, because again, 4 threads. The i5 has 4 threads, and in gaming, the i5 still might beat it a little bit. And the big wild card here, again, is still overclocking, because we don't know how well Ryzen overclocks. In fact, we haven't even really seen a lot of, and I don't even know if if we've seen much for the turbo clock, if we've seen that benchmarked much. But getting back to my point, though, is as a gamer, and again, some of you in chat can chime in on this too, because I actually am a little bit curious on this. As a gamer, if you're presented with a similar price point where you know the Intel part, like the i7, for example, does do a little bit better job in gaming, but knowing that something like the 1700X, having all those extra cores with extra threads, gives you better streaming performance, would you give up a little bit of gaming performance instead and go and keep the possibility of streaming while gaming on the same machine? And even though you're giving up a little bit maybe of gaming performance, you then at least open up the possibility of streaming in high quality, because you have all those extra cores and extra threads at the same price point. And for me, as a person that's doing YouTube very, very, very part-time, and by that I mean I make a few videos here and there, I value the potential to stream. And since I do video work, I value the ability to do video editing in general. And it allows me to render videos. And at the very least, and this is one of the beautiful things about Ryzen, even if you, and I've said this before, even if you end up going Intel, so you're about to build a new processor and you decide, you know what, although AMD gives us some very compelling options. I'm going to go Intel. At the very least, wait till Ryzen comes out because you're going to save yourself some money. Intel is going to have to respond to this because the chart sort of speaks for itself here. We're stacking a 1700X, which purportedly, and granted, you're not seeing these numbers from AMD, so grain of salt here. And I know we're all super excited at this point of AMD, by the way. If AMD went a different direction with their price points and jacked it up, it'd be a gut punch. But I would still say that the 1700X is worth, about twice what they're asking for it. If this is the actual thing or if their $389 price point is actually where it's going to be. So, Intel has to respond in price. There's no doubt about it if this benchmark is any kind of accurate towards the real world, unless somehow AMD is engineering some serious benchmark voodoo here. Intel can't keep the 6900K at $1,050, and Newegg can't continue to try to sell the 5960Xs they have on stock at $1,100 because the 1700X is beating the 5960X from Intel, and it is going toe-to-toe with the 6900K. Now, what's also interesting is that 4.4 gigahertz, if you go back to the 6900K and look at it, it's a 3.2 gigahertz part, but it turbos up to 3.7. So it's a safe bet that the stock speed, anyways, if it has decent cooling, it's running at 3.7. So it's getting an additional 0.7 gigahertz, so 700 megahertz. So if the 1700X overclocks reasonably well and can get close to that price point, then you're going to see the 1700X's, hopefully its performance scale about the same and be right up there with the 6900K. And because it's already so close, by the way, it's a little bit of a given that if it is running any kind of overclock, it's going to be beating the stock 6900K. And I know that if you're buying a 6900K, there's no doubt that you're going to have a good liquidation sale, by the way, Mega Birder. Yes, that may be what the Intel pricing looks like after this is all said and done. That's a legitimate thought. And I hadn't heard those rumors that the 1700X can OC to 4.4. If it does, that's a dream because 1700X at stock is running right around where that 6900K is. So if it can match the overclock of the 6900K, then it should, in theory, if it scales as well as the 6900K, it'll be right with it, which would be super exciting because, again, less than $400 part going up against $1,050. And, I mean, after taxes, too, that's the other thing is no one mentions tax. I mean, $1,050, if you're in a state that has any kind of sales tax, you're paying over $1,100 for it, and that's not even the platform. That's just the CPU. So here was my thought. I have a 4790K, and I have a living room PC that is still running an 8350. The thought here is if I upgrade to Ryzen at some point in the not-so-distant future, then I can move my 4790K out to the living room where it will have a great home as a gaming PC exclusive. Right now I do all my work on my 4790 is overclocked to 4.7 gigahertz. It is on air, but it's on it's the NH15 maybe from Noctua, I believe. And by the way, Top Jet S, I agree with you 100% on that. And holy crap, Ontario has a 13% sales tax. Top Jet S, that's a good point that you bring up. Yes, a lot of people, and myself included, I used to be a bit of I wouldn't say an AMD fanboy. I wanted to go AMD when I built my first PC. It was back in 2012, I think. I built with the FX 4300, and I've since upgraded that to the 8350. But I largely went that direction because I was on a college budget, and it was the platform that offered me the best price for performance. I overclocked the crap out of that 4300. I got it up to 4.8 gigahertz on a like a $40 cooler, and the cooler came later. I originally started with the processor, so I think a lot of people are so excited, not even so much by the prices of Ryzen. I think people are excited at least as much about the prices as they, or at least as much by the prospect of competition back in the CPU market space as they are about the price point. And I think AMD has done a great job with getting the hype up for Ryzen. There was a lot there were I feel like they've done this opposite thing where they set expectations reasonable and they then sort of let those expectations sort of build, and these leaks have done nothing but make hype bigger and bigger and bigger. I'm full-blown stoked to see the benchmarks when they drop. Hopefully, if all indications are correct, the embargo, I guess, will end on the 28th. And I'm also curious to see who has Ryzen samples or who is getting Ryzen samples. And you never know, maybe people get Ryzen samples like a few days before it drops. Who knows? But I'm so excited for next Tuesday when those prices. And by the way, you can go ahead and mark your calendars, guys. I'm totally going to be streaming something next Tuesday about Ryzen. It's sort of been the Ryzen show around here with any kind of videos because it's been dominating the tech news space. But you can bet that if anything drops, as far as embargo drops next Tuesday, I'll be back here. But getting back to my thought on my systems is move the 4790K out to the living room, and then I plan on upgrading my main PC here to something Ryzen. And I was thinking the 1800X because I'm one of those people that's like, yeah, I gotta have the best all the time. But if the performance here is so close between the 1700X and the 1800X that it really can't justify the $110 premium, which is starting to look like that may be the case. Then, and especially it also depends largely on overclocks, and then that's a bit of a truth. It depends on overclocks, but it looks like 1700X might be the ticket because it still gives me the 8 cores and 16 threads. So going back to the comments just for a couple seconds here. Next Tuesday, AMD is having a stream for Caspian or so. Haven't really even looked into. Personally, I haven't even really looked into what's going on next Tuesday with the hey average guy, how you doing? Haven't really even looked into the news side of what is supposed to be going on there. I'm also very curious to see when that launch date is. The last thing I really want to talk about a little bit here before I saunter on out of here is, and I'll spend several minutes talking about this for more than a second. When AMD launches, what's in chat, you can chime in on this one too. When AMD launches, what's going to be the actual price point? So I know the MSRPs are listed out, and we're all super crazy excited about that. But that was the case with the RX 482, and that was the case with most of the NVIDIA line when they first launched their GPUs last year, and we saw grossly inflated prices for a while. I was building my brother's PC at the time and getting all the parts for it, and we were lucky while Amazon was doing its huge summer sale or whatever they call it. We were fortunate. I was fortunate enough to see that they had an MSI RX 480. It was the reference cooler. It was listed at the list price of $240, and I snagged that thing. And literally minutes later, I went back to get another one because I was like, man, I could probably just buy it and like eBay it and get a gross profit on it because people want the 480, and it was the same card was unavailable. And then the next day it was back, except it had I want to say it was like an $80 premium on it. So it went from $240 Amazon Prime to $320. And what I didn't realize then was that it wasn't even shipping that day when I bought it. It just happened to be what it was. And so I snagged my brother's for $240, and somehow we were able to get his PC put together, and he had one of the first readily available 480s that there was. So that was super exciting, and I'm still dumbfounded that we were able to do that. Now, addressing a comment, unlike GPUs, they're not partner cards or anything. That's absolutely true, and that's a point worth making, is that AMD is fully in charge of getting these CPUs out. However, with board partners, you can't use a CPU without a motherboard. And I don't know how available motherboards will be. Now, I would hope to see that there are plenty of motherboards available, just because there are several people making boards for it, and there's only one AMD to make the processor. So hopefully it's more of a case of, if you can get your hands on a processor, you then are able to get your hands on a motherboard relatively simply. And I believe the boards are probably ready to go too for that. Especially because we've seen tons of not even leaks with those. We've actually seen AM4 boards, and we have seen some leaks on different, not only price points, and I guess I can move into this topic too. The boards for AMD, the other price point that AMD is killing Intel on, and they have killed Intel on for a long time on this part, is that motherboards seem to be a little bit cheaper for AMD. They usually, in the past anyways, for feature parity, they are typically cheaper. And the comment, I don't think I'll be purchasing at launch, I don't blame you. In fact, I highly recommend not purchasing at launch. I highly recommend waiting and getting the full reviews, because if you purchase at launch, you're buying a motherboard without without any kind of board review. You're buying a motherboard, and you have no security that the UEFI is solid. It might not be 100% stable, because they know, the board makers do know, by the way, that there's going to be a ton of people purchasing this at launch, and they know that if they don't have something available day one, if you're purchasing the CPU at launch, you want a board to go with it, and you're going to buy what's available. If their thing isn't available, somebody else will have something available, and you'll spend your money there. So I highly recommend, it sucks because waiting is hard. But if you have the money set aside, it pays off to, wait an extra week. Wait till those reviews roll in. Hopefully we get a scenario where we're not just seeing the Ryzen reviews, but we're also seeing the motherboard reviews like immediately. And if that's the case, then we get the full picture, at least most of the picture anyways, relatively quickly. And if you're buying, then you can make those decisions quickly. I'm in a peculiar scenario. Well, not really peculiar, but annoying scenario where March, because I get paid every other week, and I get paid every other Friday, March is a 3-pay month for me, which means I have a lot of money that's unaccounted for in my budget for March. I would like to save some money. I would really like to save some money, but man, if I don't have the itch to get the best all the time and to buy Ryzen off the bat, I don't know who does. So I would really, really like to. I love 3-pay months too, dude. I do too. So I have the funds available if I want it. I just don't know because again, like I go back to my 4790K, I have 32 gigs of RAM. If I want to get a similar amount of RAM, it's going to be a couple $100 in RAM. If I want to get a really nice motherboard, it's, a couple $250 for a motherboard, that's $450. And then if I want to get a super nice processor, by the time it's said and done, this could be a $1,000 upgrade. But it's Ryzen, and I would love to be one of the early adopters, to be one of the early people on YouTube to go, yes, I am Team Red. I am Team AMD. And by the way, I throw that out there almost ironically because I've been accused of being an Intel fanboy lately. Because I said you should wait on the hype train. Which, I still maintain. And I fully believe, don't get me wrong, I fully believe the benchmarks, and I fully believe that the price points are probably about accurate. But I really do believe that you should wait to see what the actual price in the market is, because there's a decent chance that it won't be readily available at $500. And if supply runs out, even if it barely runs out, there's gonna be a secondhand market for selling unopened parts at a huge markup. So, laptop. This, I know I said that I was almost done, but the laptops comment, it gets me going. Laptops. I'm really curious to see where AMD goes with mobile, because once Ryzen comes out, I imagine they will they will eventually have some mobile-based parts, and hopefully Intel allows them, and I use that term almost jokingly, but hopefully Intel doesn't screw with the market like they did the last time. Hopefully Intel doesn't sort of use some dirty tactics to undermine AMD. It is worth noting, though, with antitrust law the way it is, oh my God, 1 gig of DDR4 and a Celeron processor. Wow, that's one gig of DDR2. Whew. My MacBook that I had back in 2009 had more RAM. It was DDR2 though. With antitrust laws the way it is, it actually pays for Intel to have AMD around, because it does sort of shield them from antitrust lawsuits, even if it's AMD in a very weakened capacity. So we'll see. And some people, and that was the other big criticism I've gotten lately, is saying, well, if AMD's around in 3 years, and I realize their stock price is way up this year, but you have to realize they have to make a profit at some point. You can't keep posting losses and operate as a company. Eventually, you'll either sell off part of your company, split the company up, do something, but you do have to make a profit eventually, and hopefully Ryzen puts them in a position to do that. The real question is, I really wonder how much profit they make on each part here in the Ryzen lineup, especially the low end. If we go sort of down here a little bit, the low end is fascinating to me, because at the bottom end of things, the 1100 is an unlocked processor, and granted it's only 65 watts, but it's unlocked. It's an unlocked quad core at $130. And if you can get a decent overclock on it, and it doesn't have to be a huge overclock, but it'll compete with the i3s. And I hope that the fact that it's 4 physical cores, I hope it actually beats the i3s. So that's sort of my grandiose, those are my thoughts on Ryzen in general. So what I'm going to do is pop back over to the comments here and take a look. Yeah, I'm all about the enterprise right now, so it's a non-argument for me. Yeah, the enterprise is sort of a place where Ryzen's lacking, and that's sort of something that's going to shield Xeon processors in general, I think, is to my knowledge anyways. There's no ECC support here. So for certain people, for professionals, for a smaller market, which I think those Xeons a lot of the time are operating in a little bit more and more, where the i7s and Xeons are more and more similar with feature parity. I don't see that being a huge deal. Ryzen I think is more aimed at the mainstream desktop market, the gaming market. I should add the word yet to that video I did. Yeah, for those of you that didn't see that, that's the one where it's one of the recent videos. You can just check the channel. It's the one where I said something to the effect of, don't hop on the hype train. And the funny thing about that comment is originally the title had the word yet in it, and I wanted to shorten the title. I shouldn't have shortened the title. But hey, that's YouTube for you. That is basically how YouTube operates. And I have seen the rumor that the release is March 2nd. That seems to be the prevailing thought. The prevailing thought is that NDAs are going to be up the 28th. We'll get a couple days to sort of process what's going on. And Gravity Gear, I do agree with you. The enterprise market is where there's huge profit margins, because they need stability and they're willing to pay for it. It's the same reason that we have hard drives that are, 10, 20, 30, 40 terabyte hard drives that exist at all, is because in the enterprise space or in the storage space, it's actually worth your time to or worth your money to save the space of a hard drive or rack space by getting a bunch of higher capacity hard drives, even if they cost much higher price. I'm being told it's confirmed that Ryzen is releasing March 2nd. March 2nd is not far away. 9 days, guys. 9 days. Enterprise drives the market in some ways. Not every way. Not every way. There are, for example, actually it's a bad example. I might not even, but for example, things like overclocking. Enterprise will never care about overclocking, at least not to any major degree, because that introduces instability. But for a lot of features, SMB, multi-channel or combining multi-channels of network cabling, for example, in Windows, that is a direct enterprise technology filtering down, which Linus Tech Tips did a pretty cool video on. I haven't tried it myself, but it could be something cool to improve my network speed between my computer and my network attached storage. R&D money is one thing where I think AMD is going to really struggle with Intel, even as we go down the road, because Intel still has much deeper pockets than AMD. And I've talked to my brother about this one too. Even if AMD responds with Ryzen being awesome, which everything looks like Ryzen's gonna be great, Intel has the financial capability to respond quickly with a product that's at least comparable at a price point. And even if Intel's not making the big money that they were 12 months ago, in the future here with their desktop processors, their consumer class processors, Intel has the ability to absorb a lot of R&D cost in effort to get back ahead of Ryzen to a significant degree. And it's also thought by a lot, and I would say that I'm a little bit of a subscriber to the thought that Intel's probably already ahead of AMD on their R&D in the future. And Gravity Gear, I agree. Intel is going to respond as needed. And the thing that Intel, I go back to, Intel's not going to try to completely destroy AMD. They want AMD around. They just want AMD in a weakened state. They don't want to let AMD ever get back to that 48% market share they had in the mid-2000s. They want to keep AMD pretty low. They just need AMD to exist because that is a competitor in the market, and that keeps antitrust lawsuits out of the question completely, which, to be honest, I don't think they would really have to worry too much about. The one place in antitrust lawsuit, and I can only speak a little bit about this because I didn't study this for long, but antitrust lawsuit, one of the big qualifications there is if there's no competitor in the market, if you are acting as a barrier to entry in the market, then you open yourself up to antitrust lawsuits. So by keeping AMD around, you don't have to worry quite as much about being a barrier to entry because there is already another competitor there. And yes, AMD does have more money than some countries, especially countries that run a huge debt. Of course, I don't know anything about a country like that. As an American citizen, I don't know much about debt or student debt, but that's getting personal, so I'm going to stop that. And stock prices are always a projection. I think a lot of people, and I believe that most people think at this point Ryzen's going to be an awesome success. But the RX 480 was absolutely loved, but it never really did a whole lot, if any, or very little bump for the bottom line for AMD. So Ryzen needs to be successful, and it has to make money. All right, and that's the bottom line. Ryzen and Vega, Ryzen and Vega, Ryzen and Vega. Vega is a whole nother thing. Vega is another one that I'm excited for. But with Vega is a little bit different in that AMD has never in the GPU side of things fallen out of competition as badly as it did on the CPU side. Even through the 290X, 390X days there, AMD was always at least in the mid-tier competitive. Maybe not on they always their cards run a little hotter, they use a little more energy, but they at least stayed competitive. So for that, at least Vega's exciting, not nearly as exciting as the CPU side in my mind, anyways. So that's sort of my 2 cents, and more 2 cents on Ryzen and where we stand right now. We're a week from getting some serious information. I'm with you. I'm buying at some point. I just don't know when that's gonna be. I honestly, I would have bought AMD stock a year ago had I had the money to do so. Not because I thought they would actually pull out like they have as far as the stock price goes, but because I legitimately want to support a company that is fighting against the Intel juggernaut. And we'll see more and more information leaking out, or really this whole month as we've gotten closer and closer has been a little bit of a flood. And really those 20 shares you should have bought a few months ago. But hey, hindsight's 2020, especially with especially when we start talking about the stock market. Hindsight is always 2020. So, those have been my opinions on Ryzen. Take it for what you want. Those of you that have been following along for the ride, Original Zilla, Gravity Gear, you guys have been around for a while. I appreciate your support. I appreciate the chat lighting up like it did. It's always a lot more fun to stream when you guys are in the chat and at least taking some interaction there. The one nice thing I like about being a small YouTube stream there is that I can actually respond to comments. So I'm going to go ahead and move on with my day. It's been about 41 minutes. Those of you that are still around, please consider subscribing, sharing, all that good stuff. You know the bit there. It's really encouraging to see numbers growing like they have over the past month. I do appreciate you guys. Please follow me on Twitter. If you want to interact beyond just the stream, at Hoosier Hardware. Also on Instagram, I tend to post pictures of my projects as I work on them. I look forward to, I'm going to try to come back again next Tuesday and stream. So, everybody in chat, have a great evening. If you're on the East Coast, if you're on the West Coast, enjoy another hour of sunlight or so, and I will catch you guys on the next video, I suppose.